How can you do all that needs done in life and still pursue your desire to learn French or the guitar or grow a plant or make art? You can't put a fiddle under your pillow and wake up playing it. Though how cool would that be? But one thing we can do, no matter how chaotic and overwhelming life can be, is know that every tiny small motion in the direction of those endeavors really do matter. And not only that, they add up over time with great momentum. Join me, Fain, as I interview painters and gardeners, designers and musicians, photographers and cooks, creative livers of any kind who have somehow, in the middle of it all, continued on their creative paths, no matter what. Hello, sweet folks. A quick note to let you know that there is a treat for you at the end of this week's episode. This interview is of David Hughes. David is a singer, songwriter, and multi-instrumentalist whose sound is steeped in old American music. Since his youth, he's been highly influenced by Piedmont blues, mountain string bands, and ballad singers in his native state of North Carolina, and now writes his own music rooted in these rich traditions. Make sure to listen to the end to hear saber rattling from David's new record, Trials in Time. This is Fain House Radio, and I'm so glad you're here.
My name is David Hughes. The most creative element in my life has been music. Music has been my dominant creative endeavor. I have found a lot of other ways to, find creativity, but, many of the day-to-day ways in which I feel creative are less invigorating as music. Creativity just feels much more genuinely creative to me.
Would you add building things on your list of creative endeavors of your past?
Yeah, I would say so. There are many projects, especially with energy-related things. I've converted a couple of vehicles to run on waste grease many, many moons ago. Yeah, there were a lot of just, technical, productive elements, but there were also some really technical challenges that required creative solutions. And some of them worked and some of them didn't, but went through it nonetheless. I'm glad for it.
You're one of the first people I ever met that was super genuinely interested in alternative fuel sources to the extent that you converted your own car. Did you have other friends or company in that, or did you feel alone? And this is years ago, it wasn't like the mode at the time.
I certainly knew some people, but actually it's interesting that drive to, pun intended, that drive to find more efficient and renewable ways to accomplish day-to-day things like driving ended up connecting me with a lot of people that shared those common interests. But yeah, when I first ran across the idea of used vegetable oil as a fuel, I was working at a small solar installation company up here in Madison County, and I literally just found a book on the shelf and was like, can I borrow this book? And it was From the Fire to the Fuel Tank. A lot of diehard grease people were probably familiar with it. It popularized it for a lot of people. But yeah, I just got that book and went through it. This was before just going to Google for answers. And once I converted that first car to run on grease, I had a couple of times where I brought it to UNC Asheville and had it up on campus and, did some showings of it. And through that and a couple of other means, just met a bunch of people that were also into it. Sort of yes and no, I guess, to answer your question.
Explain what you would do when you're on the road and ran out of grease and ran out of fuel.
I would find a restaurant that had a grease bin out back. And first I'd go check the grease bin. If I could find the grease bin, I'd just go check it and see, first of all, is it full? And second, did it look really nasty? Like, did it look like particularly disgusting? Did I want to spend an hour or so back here with this grease bin? And if it passed those two tests and the restaurant was open, I would go and I would ask and I'd explain what I was there doing and if they minded if I took, because at the time, a lot of these places had to pay a service to haul it off. That's no longer the case. Most places are now paid for it because it's become much more of a commodity. But yeah, at the time, I would just go ask, and more often than not, people would say, yeah, absolutely. What are you doing? Huh? Crazy. And come back and check it out.
Kudos to you for not just being interested in reading about it, but you actually did the thing. It's one thing to read a book. It's a whole nother thing to do it. And I admire that. Tell us a little bit about where you live.
So I live in Marshall, North Carolina, up in Madison County. I live just off of Main Street, up on one little creek, one of the several creeks that come into town. We're just right there next to the branch, and I can walk to town, walk to the coffee shop and the grocery store and the studio, the office that I'm in right now. And I can also walk to work. I work at the Madison County Arts Council, and it's between here and there.
You know, you're living in the Appalachian Mountains, and also just the balance of choosing a little bit more of a country town and country life, and how that connects with your thoughts about living a good life versus being in a city. And it seems like you've always had that draw, which also connects to Appalachian style old time music. It's not the only kind of music you play, but it's all connected.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I like living in the country and I like living in the city. I really like both a lot. They're both very stimulating and interesting in different ways. I think in the end, we've settled up here for, proximity to family. My parents and my sister and her family live close by. And also just access to what I consider deep wilderness, areas where you can go and either go for a hike or a trail run for many miles and not see anyone else, not see another house or anything, but just get out into some pretty deep woods without having to drive really, really far. Yeah, just, I don't know, the beauty of the wilderness, I really appreciate.
Why do you think you like playing music and singing?
That's a great question. I think that humans are supposed to be musical. I know not everyone feels like they are comfortable playing music, but I think that pretty much everyone can tap their feet and clap their hands and dance. And I think probably everyone can sing. But, whether or not individuals feel like they should or not is a personal thing. But, I just feel like it's a very fundamental human experience, which to me says it's in our genes to have a positive response to this activity. It's one of two things for me. Music is either social and it's connecting with other people in a rhythmic, cooperative sort of way. And to me, that's a great social experience. I mean, we are a social animal, and I will not sit here and pretend like I'm not an emotional animal. And I think that it, especially in solitude, is a way to process things. It's a way to emote that feels healthier, certainly than some of the other ways that I've used over the years. So I would say, fundamentally, I feel like it's a human experience that makes me feel good because that's just what happens to humans that play music. I feel like it is social in a really positive way, and it's a great mental health tool.
I was thinking about how when we first met, we were like 18 and 19 years old, and it was because of the banjo. It was totally because of the banjo. And that's funny to think about. And I just was curious. I know this is a hard question to answer. What is one of the most fun or funny or random things that have happened to you because you had a banjo?
I think that some of the more exciting or interesting or fun things that have happened for walking around with the banjo have been whenever I'm traveling and playing music. And I think this is just music in general. I mean, I would say the same is true for, playing fiddle somewhere on the streets, playing banjo on the streets. The guitar, I guess, for being a little more common, catches people's eyes maybe a little less often. But both banjo and fiddle, I would say when busking, I've just met such both crazy characters and also just good people. I was busking in London one time many years ago in the pre-family days when you could do things like go to London and play music on the street. I met a guy who just hung out and listened, and the next thing you know, we're talking a little bit. And I was traveling and I like to travel without plans. I feel like that openness allows certain opportunities that wouldn't otherwise happen. And I just asked the guy, kind of casually in our conversation, if he knew of a either cheap or decent place to stay while I was there. And, he thought for a second and he said, well, why don't you just come stay at my place? And, I looked at him. I was like, I don't think he's going to kill me. He seems cool enough. And so I just went and stayed with him, and I stayed at his house for like 3 or 4 days, and he made food and every morning made tea, and we sat around and talked, and then he'd go to work, and then I'd go out and busk, and we'd get back together in the evenings for supper. And I learned about his family, which was all from the North, and they were all miners up there. I mean, it's just a fascinating cultural experience that I would not have had just walking around London. That's probably one of the top ones for playing music on the street in particular.
So you feel that it's confirmed that a banjo is a good person magnet?
Or a good person deterrent. I'm sure I have run off plenty of people with a banjo. Yeah, it's a good filter. It's a real good filter.
You are teaching students now also. What do you tell them in honor of, it's not easy all the time. You hit walls, or you're trying to get your hands to do the right thing. It can be so super frustrating. And then the other is we have this resistance to kind of practice, and what we need is time. So what do you tell your students in honor of those things, and how to keep going even when it's not comfortable?
While we're in class and we're spending some time really just playing, I try to make sure that as much as we can in class, we're actually playing music. I break things down and stop and talk about theory, about exactly how the melody goes. But a lot of times I just try to make sure that we're playing music so that I do keep it in that social sphere, and then also try to get it to being closer to being fun sooner than later. I try to give compliments when I see progress and encouragement when I see progress. And then I also try to let them know to expect it to be painful. I mean, kids will fuss about their fingers hurting. And I'm like, good, that's the way it's supposed to be. That is a good sign. And you should celebrate that, because that means you're working. And that means you will be having more fun with it sooner. It's cliche, but no pain, no gain. I sort of say that in 1,500 different ways to them.
How about you for practicing, working on new material, or are you writing your own music? What are you thinking about these days?
I do both, but right now I'm mostly what I call playing. I'm doing it for the sheer fun of it, or if I'm performing somewhere, I'm doing it for quote unquote work, but I'm really, really thankful for that work. So I'm really happy about it. And I'm usually not making enough money to stress out about it. So I try to keep it as much fun as I can. But that said, I absolutely have sessions where I know there's a hurdle I want to get over, or there's an incomplete song, an incomplete thought that I really want to flush out. And those require the work of it. I would say right now that's less than the playing, but I think both are critical. And I look forward to more times when I have more time to do more of that hard work, because it pays off. Not always, but it generally pays off.
You're more recently really taking your music more seriously from a career point of view. Was it a scenario where you had a day job and you quit that day job? What was that process for you to make that decision?
I wouldn't say I completely quit a day job, but I quit one specific day job that I'd had for a really long time. There was high stakes, high stress, all consuming. It was a career. It was a serious job working for a very large company. And I was very thankful for that work, but I got to the point where I could no longer do it in the way that I needed to feel good about it. Yeah. So I put in my resignation, and I started doing some more kind of odd jobs around here. As I was doing that and finding more time and more space, I'd always had it in my mind to take music a little more seriously, but never felt like I had the window, never felt like I had the space. And all of a sudden I was finding myself having the space, and I was also sort of trying to figure out what was next. So, I don't know. It seemed sort of clear to me that focusing in particular on making a record would be a worthwhile project that I could put myself into. I think that was part of it. My former job, I stopped being able to put myself into it. The stress and the sheer work hours and other life pressures made it to where I started to dread it. And I dreaded it for far too long. And I needed something else. And yeah, making a record has not been as financially lucrative, but I've not had any trouble getting out of bed to go work on the record.
And that level of stress over years can make you sick. You're a dad of children, and I don't know. There's so much in it. It is a leap of faith, but also it's an investment in so many ways too, in your health and happiness and all that.
Exactly. I was talking with a friend earlier today about this transition, and it was swapping financial security for meaning security, for purpose security. I think the word is used a little too specifically, but libido to me is like life force. It's not just one element of life, but it's like the excitement and enthusiasm for life. It was an investment in finding more of that. The feeling that I get out when I go on a trail run, you just feel very good about what it is that's going on. Yeah, there's no anxiety, angst, stress. It's just living pretty well.
It's like feeding your inner flame.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's awesome. I'm really happy for you to make the leap, because it's a leap. And so you're talking about your album. At the end, people will be able to listen to a track. Talk to us a little bit about that process, how it felt to make it.
The album is called Trials in Time. It is 7 pieces, 6 songs and 1 instrumental. It's 3 covers and then 3 original songs, and the instrumental is original. The covers are old. I mean, I don't even know that I needed to get publishing. They might be public domain, but I went ahead and got the rights for the mechanical copies. I think what I have always been drawn to is old American music. Old music, period. But, I just was surrounded by old American music, either in field recordings or old people that I was chasing down in the corners of festivals. So I'm trying to, honor a lot of those sounds, but also have my own self in it. So I would say, for lack of a better way to describe it, roots, Americana, country. I wouldn't call it bluegrass. I wouldn't call it old time. But it's those roots are certainly in there. They're unavoidable in my playing.
And are you playing a range of different instruments, or are you on guitar only?
No, I'm playing a range. Yeah, I play guitar, I play banjo, I play the organ on one piece. And this is a secret, right? Don't tell anybody. It's not published, but I'm also playing the drums on it.
Yeah. Nice.
Well, no. You haven't heard it yet. I wouldn't say nice. You're like, oh yeah.
Oh, I got faith. Are there any sacrifices that you've had to make to follow your creative path? I mean, we've talked about the financial side of that version of a kind of security, but is there anything else that comes to mind that you had to let go in honor of holding on to your creative self?
Yeah. So, I mean, financial is kind of the most obvious probably for most people's, not many people go into a creative life for the money. But yeah, I mean, I think of any and all of these things in terms of opportunity costs. Like, what are the things that I'm not doing? I try not to dwell on that, but I certainly look at those as they come up. And there are certainly opportunities that have come up that I have considered, but would require me to drop a lot of my focus on music and sort of local arts related things. Many of those have been in my former career. I mean, they would also be financial, but that's not my motivator as much anymore. I had an opportunity to go look at various fuel production plants in the country and look at how they would impact certain carbon fuel standards in the country. And to me, that was very fascinating, intriguing, and tempting. And it seemed like it could be all consuming. And this was also during COVID, when I had become a stay-at-home homeschooling dad in a way that I wasn't prepared for. So there's always opportunity costs to anything, but I would say the main sacrifice has been financial, and then also just saying most other things I'm gonna put on hold for right now.
Like making peace with the fact that there's always a thing you're not doing if you choose a thing, which is the only option. So,
amen. Yeah. FOMO will kill you if you don't watch out. Ignore it best I can.
Yes, good advice. What is filling your inspiration cup these days?
Lately, I have been going, there's a group in Asheville who have this concert every Wednesday. It's called Open Folk, Folk, Open Folk Asheville. You can look them up, but they have an evening where it's generally six artists, 3 songs for each artist. It's basically a curated variety show. They have a handful of requirements. One of them is that the space that the concert is held needs to be beautiful, and they have absolutely done that, hands down. They require, I believe, that all the music is original. So you don't do cover tunes, you don't do traditional stuff, but you actually do original songwriting. Everyone that I've seen has been all acoustic. The absolute best requirement is that they say at the beginning, if you're here to talk or do anything else, there's the door. And so it's a listening. I mean, it is like I've never been in listening room. And people get up there and just put themselves out there. And, I don't like all of it, but even when I don't like something, I love that someone is doing it. And I love that they're putting themselves out there. And I love that there's a room full of people really paying attention. So just that whole experience, it was last night, I went to the either 5th or 6th one that I've been to. And I can't quit going. It's so good. And what I find is more and more I look around, I realize many of the people in the audience are musicians themselves. They either did it last week or they're coming up next week. It's just a very supportive, creative group of folks.
That sounds so awesome.
It's killer. I've told many people about it, and I've not had anyone be like, yeah, that wasn't that great. Everyone's just at least by 1, if not 6 acts, pretty impressed and floored, and then gets fired up about it. It's just inspiring. And
like you're saying, to have people really intently listening, that is not always easy to find. And then, like you're saying, also everybody's inspiring each other, like a little creativity lab.
Absolutely. I got to do it 3 or 4 weeks ago. And the experience of playing there, I drove down to Asheville and played 3 songs for free. Like, I would do that any day of the week rather than going to a brewery and getting $200. Yeah, the spirit of the whole room, not to get too woo-woo, but the vibe, it's really good. It's really, really good.
Well, it's like you had a spiritual pay or something. It was a different kind of pay. I mean, that's why I ask this question every time, like, what's filling your cup, your inspiration cup? The idea is that you're going out and finding things and ingesting them and putting them in and, actively doing that. And that's such a great example. Do you have any last words of encouragement for everybody and anybody out there just doing the best they can to fold creativity into their daily lives?
It's a little bit in line with what I tell my students, but it's also more than anything what I tell myself. The roller coaster of life, period. If you don't really embrace and try to figure out a way to get excited about the failures, about the roadblocks, about the problems, you just finding gratitude for failure has been the thing that's really helped me, because I think 10 years ago, and definitely 15, 20 years ago, failure would knock me down in a way that then I'd just kind of sit down in that failure and ruminate, rather than being like, oh, that's the low point on the roller coaster. I got to get back up so I can get to the high point, regression to the mean, right? Like it's going to get better only if you keep trying, and your failure just means you're trying. So that's awesome. Soaking up failure has been my biggest advice to myself. And I don't know how to, I'm not, I'm not qualified to give advice to others, but that's what I tell myself.
Imagine you having like a failure party every time that it happens. I love that idea.
I have a pity party, but it's kind of a good party.
Yeah, I bet it's a great party. And you're on to the next, man, on to the next.
Gotta be.
Anger and sick saber rattling, that's how this long, lonesome, sad, bloody battle begins in the mind of all those men in the mill, long for the lead, high on the hill to kill, in their arrogance, anger and sick saber rattling. Oh, that's how this battle begins. You say you're right, and you know I'm wrong, yet you pray to fight while I'm just so in my song on how we ought to better treat each other's fathers, sons, and brothers, sisters, daughters, and mothers. Arrogance, anger, and sick saber rattling, that's how this battle begins. Sick, seeing those lying flags flying so high on the sick throughout them holy halls with such ignorance tread, they'll never say pray tell on what they've not read. Their arrogance, anger, and their sick saber rattling, that's how this battle begins. Oh, arrogance, anger, sick saber rattling, that's how this long, lonesome, sad, bloody battle begins in the mind of all those men in the mill, long for the lead, high on the hill to kill, in their arrogance, anger, and sick saber rattling. Oh, that's how this battle begins. Oh, that's how this battle, that long, lonesome saddle, that's how this battle begins.
New episodes are coming your way, and I sure hope that you subscribe to the show so that these episodes pop up automatically in your feed. And if you know anyone at all who might find support and inspiration from these conversations, please do share it with them too. Thanks so much to David for joining us today, and thanks so much to you for listening. I'm Annie Fain Barrelon, and I'll leave you with a quote for the day. A creative life is an amplified life. It's a bigger life, a happier life, an expanded life, and a hell of a lot more interesting life. Elizabeth Gilbert.